It seems like we see violence everywhere, whether it's a mass shooting or terrorism. Where does this violence come from? We're going to examine this question and probe into our distant past to try to uncover the roots of aggression. Transformational theory describes four choice points that represent potential vulnerabilities and corresponding protective factors. Despite originating at different historical time points, these choice points are always present, and they can help us better understand the roots of violence and why power abuse occurs. Between 95 and 99% of human history was spent hunting and gathering, and during much of this time, aggressive and even violent behaviors were essential for our survival. There are, of course, times when violent, aggressive behavior is necessary, such as when authoritarian regimes threaten our freedom and safety, such as when genocide occurs. It's important to recognize that highly aggressive and competitive tendencies are within our genes, as it dates back to our animal ancestry. Let's look at chimpanzees, our closest animal relative. Jane Goodall observed tribes of chimpanzees behaving fiercely, fighting for territory, and systematically killing members of other groups. These aggressive biological tendencies are mirrored in our own history of continuous warfare and struggles for power. But Goodall's work also shows that there were vibrant inner qualities, such as abundant energy, playfulness, and vitality in chimpanzees. These genetically shaped characteristics also reside within our species, as evidenced by the cooperative cultural practices of small band hunter-gatherer societies, which included food sharing, collective child rearing, and the pooling of resources to build communal living spaces. We share with our ancestors aggressive and cooperative instincts. Transformational theory suggests that if there are no or very few constraints on aggressive tendencies, then we are vulnerable to the types of innate violent qualities that have contributed to the power abuses that we so commonly see in our world. Within our genes, we have the potential for the expression of self-serving, abusive expressions of power, as well as altruistic, joyous aspects of ourselves that can be used to create communities that are healthy and supportive. Let's now examine the constraints on aggression. Our species, for hundreds of thousands of years, lived intimately connected to the natural environment and was infused with an appreciation for nature. But during hundreds of thousands of years, our species slowly evolved, learning to use fire, make tools, and develop language. Then around 10,000 years ago, Homo sapiens domesticated animals and began farming. This revolution secured a sturdier and more reliable food supply, which in turn provided resources that allowed and stimulated the development of cities and civilizations, which had enormous benefits, including cultural expansion and the invention of writing. Our growing prowess with civilization provided us the wherewithal to control the forces of nature, and this led to another choice point: to either sanctify and appreciate our connection to animals and the land, or to repudiate and sever this connection. One path fostered interconnectedness and ecological diversity, whereas the other path fostered dominance and control of a world seen as dangerous and in need of taming. The critical choice point facing us today, a respectful balance with nature or a need to control and dominate the forces of nature, these distinct paths have been with us for centuries, but now the consequences of these choices are more acute for our species' survival. Although disease and war did shorten people's lives, Stein adds that in pre-industrial times, life transformations were honored and saturated with meaning. For centuries, religions and rituals have sustained and nurtured our species and provided us with an underlying sense of meaning. The Renaissance in the 15th century and our closer inspection of the natural world helped usher in the scientific revolution. The products and discoveries of this revolution have fueled advances in medicine, transportation, and energy that have provided enormous benefits to our species. But the scientific revolution might have also made us vulnerable, as these advances in our understanding of the physical world led to a new way of thinking about our relationship to the universe. With the Earth no longer seen as the center of the universe, and with confirmation of the theory of evolution in our descent from chimpanzees, suggesting a very different creation story, a new vulnerability emerged, which could question the merit and very worth of past rituals and guides that have provided us meaning. As an example, existentialists later claimed that meaning could only be found in the persistent struggle in the absurdity of life, such as Camus' The Myth of Sisyphus. Of course, from 1400 to 1800, most people were still connected to the land as farmers or tradespeople, and most continued to be members of one religious group or another. But the vulnerability occurs if science eroded meaningful mythologies and customs that had helped us understand our place in the universe. Here's the choice point, and the scientific revolution could help us appreciate and recognize our place in the universe, but these same discoveries could unwittingly strip us of a reason for living, and even undermine those social controls that moderate instinctual forces within us. Clearly, science does not need to sterilize or diminish our place in the world. For example, in a 1997 book I stated, on the spiritual path, the analytic, thinking mind needs to accompany and protect the open heart. Maslow offered an excellent example of this blending of intuitive and analytic ways of thinking. In The Psychology of Science, Abraham Maslow posited that dichotomizing science and religion is a chief problem for social scientists who wish to know the whole person, and that a Taoist method of observation, one that does not interfere with or judge what it is observing, is better equipped to expand our understanding of the human condition. The final choice point involves urban and industrialization, which began in the early 1800s and was spurred on by advances in the scientific revolution. Slowly, there was less need for the vast majority of humans to toil the land, as mechanization allowed for tremendous advances in food production and time for improvements in the quality of life. During this time, there was movement of people away from rural, trade-based communities towards cities, where social structures were markedly fluid and individualistic. As people moved to cities, for some, their former connections to a rich web of life that encompassed family and community may have begun to erode. In addition, urban industrialization could have begun to replace the sense of coherence and satisfaction that many people had found in their work. If maintaining contact with family and community is requisite for wellness, then a disturbing trend is that so many individuals feel isolated in environments where meaning is often focused on getting ahead, often at the expense of others. Today, this rupture in our connection with the land and community has been further exacerbated by the creation of an ever-intoxicating internet world, which has exposed another vulnerability with the weakening of ties to family, friends, and community. I'm not going to suggest that the solution is to revert back to an agrarian lifestyle, but rather to understand that we can reestablish intimate connections with others in urban dwellings that enhance our sense of community. It's important to consider the four choice points together. What occurred 10,000 years ago was that our species learned to cultivate the land and produce a more stable food supply, which paved the way for civilization. Humanity was presented a choice point in the wake of this revolution. We could assume a respectful approach toward the natural world or use our growing knowledge to control and dominate nature. Centuries later, the scientific revolution expanded our understanding of the universe, as when Galileo invented the telescope to see the moon and recognized that we revolved around the sun. The scientific revolution presented our species with a new understanding of the natural world, but a belief in only science might have begun stripping away the customs and beliefs of prior centuries. The industrial and computer revolutions, too, advanced our species' quality of life, but they also had the potential to separate us from closely knit communities with ties to the family and land. To the extent that humanity chooses to control the forces of nature, to undermine cultural and religious belief systems, and to sever ties with family, friends, and community, there's a potential for losing the protection of social and cultural support systems that have successfully regulated expressions of violence and aggression. True, it's important to also recognize that some ancient cultures, mythologies, and religions perpetuated human rights violations, such as child abuse and the marginalization of women, and of course such practices should be condemned. Many of these practices are in fact a product of the vulnerabilities we have discussed, but this is not a reason to lose sight of the many positive contributions that these traditions offer us. The constant viewing of violence throughout the media and internet have led many to feel that there's more violence today, but Pinker feels that there's evidence from multiple sources that there's actually less violence and homicides over time. He credits this change to a number of factors, including the rise of societies with central governments, particularly democracies. Feminization's another reason, as women have increased positions of power. There's also evidence of less testosterone in our species over the past 200,000 years, which might have occurred through selective breeding of less aggressive people, similar to what's been shown in foxes that have been bred for self-domestication, according to Trutt. Finally, other factors Pinker notes are more logical thinking when making policies, and the mass media allowing us to perceive others as less dangerous. While the percentage of deaths in the total population due to violent conflicts are at a historical low, the actual number of deaths has actually increased. Clearly, Pinker has focused his work on rates rather than numbers, and even if these rates of physical violence are less, there's other forms of violence that need to be considered, including mass incarcerations, inequality, poverty, and racism. Climate change and the extermination of so many animal species is not just an innocent and unintended consequence of a growing world population and economic expansion. If violence is defined as physical force intended to hurt or kill someone, our planet has certainly been severely injured by our actions. The transformational perspective helps provide a deeper understanding of the breakdown of community values and the rise of power abuse that occurs in our society by reflecting on the past. Cooperation and altruism are enhanced when our species lives in balance with nature, when we embrace customs, beliefs, and value systems that affirm life, and when we are connected to family and community. In a 2013 book, I asserted that without this roadmap, social activists may fail to navigate through seemingly intractable problems and abuses of power. Our interventions have changed the social context as well as other social regulatory factors. For example, Gary Slutkin, founder of Cure Violence, deploys credible outreach workers to interrupt conflicts, treat the highest risk individuals, and change community norms. This program has found, for example, a 34 to 56% reduction in shootings and killings in sections of Baltimore, and the program is now being used in countries around the world. At the policy level, when Australia banned rapid-fire guns after a 1996 mass shooting, killings decreased. While there were 13 mass shootings before the gun law reforms from 1979 to 1996, there were no fatal mass shootings after the gun law reforms from 1997 to 2016. These types of interventions do suggest that violence can be interrupted, but the transformational theory digs deeper, just as an archaeologist, in trying to understand the customs, norms, and values of individuals within context, which have been influenced by different historical eras. My thesis is that breakdowns of social and regulatory mechanisms, as well as educational and economic inequalities, have contributed to many of the symptoms of violence that we continue to witness. Interventions that promote social justice are better understood as well as actualized, when examining whether we are trying to live in balance with or trying to inappropriately control nature, whether we see scientific advancements in knowledge as bringing meaning or invalidating our sense for coherence, and whether our social settings promote social isolation or a richer sense of community. Many feel that as each community is different, contextualism would suggest that there are no laws or regularities that are common to all settings. But I believe there are fundamental historical challenges that promote vulnerabilities or resilience. In some ways, the 4 choice points are a critique of the contextualist approach, and my position is that there are universal themes that should be considered in every context. In this presentation, I've suggested that we need to consider an history perspective as we conceptualize solutions to social problems. Social change agents who hope to create meaningful, lasting change require a theory that suggests deeper ways to combat social problems, to address power abuse, and to optimize wellness and a sense of community. Many of the ideas for this video are further elaborated in the following publications. Other references alluded to in this talk include those on this slide. I'd also like to thank you for listening to my ideas about the transformational theory and violence. Finally, I want to thank Carl Conroy for his help with content in this video, and also Ted Boback for his help with the PowerPoints.